binary is a bit more awkward. You basically start with the decimal number and divide with the decreasing power of 2. For each division, the quotient is a binary digit and the remainder is divided by the next smallest power of 2. Here is the conversion of 182 back to binary. So I think I remember doing it manually where we will draw that division thing, and then whenever whatever is the quotient, we will start writing that, and then that makes up the binary number. And at the end, you either have a 0 or a 1 left because you're always dividing by 2, and that's when you stop. So, chapter 8 has a more extensive description of this technique. Regardless, the converting between binary and decimal is usually not something that can be done without a paper and pencil or lots of practice. In chapter 8, we also learned about the octal or base 8 number system, where we saw octal only uses digits from 0 to 7 and converting between octal and binary in a snap. All you need to remember is the 3-bit equivalent of each octal digit, as shown in the table on next page, where I think if you remember this, then you can decode like any binary number. So if you have a binary number such as 10110110, start at the rightmost group of digits. Each group of 3 bits is an octal digit. So we see 6, 6, and 2. So the byte 10110110 can be expressed as an octal digit 266. This is certainly more succinct, and octal is indeed one good method for representing bytes. But octal has a little problem. The binary representation of bytes range from 8 bits of 0 through 8 bits of 1. The octal representation of same bytes range from 000 through 377. So they still are going from 0 to 255. But I think in octal it just becomes 377. As is clear in the preceding example, 3 bits corresponds to the middle and the rightmost octal digit, but only 2 bits corresponds to the leftmost octal digit, which means that an octal representation of a 16-bit number would look something like this. So this is basically 131705. And that isn't the same as octal representation of 2 bytes, thus compose a 16-bit number. So if we use like two different bytes that compose the 16-bit number, it will look very different than that, despite being the exactly same binary number. So if you see here 101100, so and 11 and 10110011, and then this is going from here. So 11000101, 1100 101. So whenever you are given a binary number, if you know the number of bits, it makes it easy because then you can group them accordingly and then divide them. In order for the representation of multi-byte value to be consistent with the representation of individual byte, we need to use a system in which each byte is divided into equal number of bits. That means that we need to divide each byte into 4 values of 2 bits each, and that would be the base 4. Or 2 values of 4 bits each, then that becomes the base 16. So base 16, now that is something we haven't looked at yet, and for a good reason. The base 16 number system is called hexadecimal, and even the word itself is a mess. Most words that begin with prefix, such as hexagon or hexapod or hexameter, refer to 6 of something, and this used to confuse me as well. So hexadecimal is supposed to mean 16 because it's hexadec and deca is 10, something like that. Even though the Microsoft Manual of Style for Technical Publication clearly states do not abbreviate as hex, everyone always does, and I will too. That's not a peculiarity of hexadecimal. In decimal, we count like this. So we go from 0 to 12 and 0 to n. In octal, you will recall we no longer need digits 8 and 9. So we go from 0 to 7, and then we go from 10 to 11, and then we keep going. Similarly, in the base system, base 4, the numbers don't need 4, 5, 6, or 7. So we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and then so on, 2, 0. And binary, of course, we only need 0 and 1. So we go 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, and so on. But hexadecimal is different because it requires more digits than decimals. And counting in hexadecimal goes something like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we know, I think most of you know, it's like A, B, C, D, E, F. I think we will learn about that. And then it goes back to 10, 11, 12. It's a little disorienting to think about. So where 10 pronounced 0 is actually 16 of our decimal 10, because hexadecimal goes till 15 and 10 is the 16th number. in hexadecimal. So the question mark indicates that we need six more symbols to display the hexadecimal numbers. What are these symbols? Where do they come from? Well, they were not handed down to us in a tradition like rest of our number system. So the rational thing to do is make up six symbols. For example, so there is a hat, a like a American football ball, rugby, donuts, cat, looks like a globe, and a knife or a dagger. Unlike the symbol used for most of the numbers, these have benefits of being easy to remember and identify what actual quantities they represent. So there is 10-gallon of cowboy hat, a football, 11 players on a team, a dozen donuts, a black cat associated with unlucky 13, a full moon, no, that's not a globe, a full moon that occurs about a fortnight, every 14 days after the new moon, and a knife that reminds us for the assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides 15th day of the March. This seems a little excessive. Each byte can be expressed as two hexadecimal digits. In other words, a hexadecimal digit is equivalent to 4 bits or 1 nibble. The table on the next page shows how to convert between binary, hexadecimal, and decimal. And this is something I remember like doing a lot of rote learning and cramming. But so I think we know that 0000 is 0 in decimal, 0 in hexadecimal, and then so on. And then I think it has reduced this with like bunch of different things. Here is how to represent the byte 10110110 in hexadecimal. So there is a football and a 6, and we are using 4 bits as we discussed, a nibble. So 4 bits is always used for one digit. And can anyone tell me why we use 4 bits here? I'm just trying to see if you guys are listening.
It
Because
seems
4 bits are required to represent one hexadecimal digit, right? So
Yes.
we
Yeah. So 2 raised to the power 4. Yes. That's correct. Okay. So sorry, where is my chat gone? Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's correct. So it doesn't matter if we are dealing with a multi-byte system. So I think in this case we can again convert it. In this case we can convert it. So one byte is always represented by a pair of hexadecimal digit. So one byte is 8 bits, which means it will be always two hexadecimal digits. And this is very important when it comes to memory address. So unfortunately, or perhaps much to your relief, we really aren't going to be using footballs and donuts to write hexadecimal numbers. It could have been done that way, but it was not. Instead, the hexadecimal system ensures that everybody gets really confused and stays that way. Those six missing hexadecimal digits are actually represented by first six letters of Latin alphabet like this. So 0 to 9, and then it goes from A to F, and then it goes back to 1 0. And now it shows the real conversation. I think this is just like a weird attempt of confusing us, but between binary, hexadecimal, and decimal. And I think this is what like everyone has mostly learned here. So the byte 1011 and 0110 can thus be represented by a hexadecimal number B6 without you drawing a football. As you will recall from previous chapters, I have been indicating the number bases as subscript, such as, so we write basically at like this. So this tells us that this is base 2 and not like decimal number. For binary we write this, and then for quaternary we write base 4, for octal we write base 8, for decimal we write base 10, and for hexadecimal we can now write 16, or we can even write 16. Oh, Sachin has a hand up. Yes, Sachin.
I believe the choice for using arbitrary symbols for them was to show us that it could have been anything, and whether like Roman numerals of A, B, C, D, it could have been Greek as well. It could have been alpha, beta, gamma in our computers as well. So I believe
Yeah,
that is the attempt of the author.
yeah, probably. It could have been anything. It was up to us, and I think using ABCDEF was a natural choice because that's another
Yes,
counting system that most of the world by 1960s was in, like they studied that very well. Yeah.
like imagine if they were Chinese numerals and we all had to learn Chinese.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, or I don't know, Egyptian, maybe hieroglyphs if they
Yeah,
invented this like few thousand years back. So it would be some drawings of pyramids and cats, probably.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, for hexadecimal. So fortunately, several other methods of denoting hexadecimals are common. So instead of writing the whole 16, you can either write hex, or you can even write H. So this is a, I will be using a very common approach, which is lowercase h followed by a number like this. So in a hexadecimal, the position of each digit corresponds to the power of 16 now. So if I have to convert a number back, like if I have something like 9a48ch, I'll write it again, and then it again is like 16 raised to the power 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we do a sum, which it is trying to do it here. So 9 into this, and then this can be written as power of 16. So each becomes C into 16, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we use the decimal equivalence of those power. And then we replace this A and C with their decimal number. So A becomes 10 and C becomes 12. So notice that there is no ambiguity in writing single digits of numbers, 9, A4, 8C, without a subscript to indicate a number base. A 9 is a 9 whether it is decimal or hexadecimal, and an A is obviously a hexadecimal equivalent of 10 in decimal. So once you convert it back to the decimal, it lets us know that this is 631,948. This is how hexadecimal numbers are converted to decimal. And then here is a template for converting any 4-digit hexadecimal number to a decimal. So again, these are like pre-calculated power of 16. And if you now put like some number, let's say 79 ACH, which tells us that it's a hexadecimal number, we can just do that, multiply them with these values, add them, and it comes 31,148. Fairly straightforward. Converting decimal numbers to hexadecimal generally requires divisions. If the number 255 is smaller, it can be represented by 1 byte, which is 2 hexadecimal digits. 1 byte, 8 bits, 4 bits each. To calculate these two, divide the number by 16 to get the quotient and the remainder. And then, as an earlier example where we were converting the decimal number to binary, so in this case, if we try to convert 182 into hexa, so when we do 182 by 16, we get 1111, which is B in hexadecimal, and we get a remainder of 6, and the decimal equivalent is B6H. If the decimal number you want to convert is smaller than 65,536, which is basically the 16 bits, the hexadecimal equivalent will have 4 digits or fewer. Here is a template for converting such a number to hexadecimal. So you start by putting the entire decimal number in the box in upper left of the corner. That's your first dividend. Divide 4096, the first divisor. The quotient goes into the box below the dividend. Again, it's the same thing. If you draw that the way we learned it in India also, like anything you put in the top right quotient, then that keeps becoming your number. And at the end, whatever is the remainder, you just add that at the end. So the remainder goes into the box to the right of the dividend. And that remainder is now the new dividend that you divide by 256. And here is the conversion of 31,148 back to hexadecimal. So you divide 31,148 by 4096, you get 7. Whatever is left goes here. Divide by 256, 9. 172 is the remainder. And obviously, the remainder will always be less than the divisor, that the number you are dividing from, because it has to follow the math rule. So then 172 divides by 16, 10, and then you get 12 divided by 1, and it's 12. And of course, we know that 10 and 12 are A and C. So then this becomes 79ACH. And this is very important because I think we will probably start talking about hex dumps of like memory and how we use these as addresses and why we do it like that way. So one problem with this technique is that you probably want to use a calculator for divisions, but calculators don't show remainders. If you divide 31,148 by 4096, you will basically get 7.6044, this long number. To calculate the remainder, now you need to multiply 4096 by 7 to get this number, and then subtract that from 31,148, right? Like we have all done that probably in calculators. Or you can multiply, you can take this, whatever is this decimal, and you can multiply 4096 by 0.6044, and then you will get back the fractional part of the quotient. So on the other hand, some calculators can convert between decimal and hexadecimal. So I remember, I think my engineering calculator had the option of doing that. It was a nice Casio calculator. So another approach to converting hex decimal numbers through 65,535 to hex involves first separating the two numbers into 2 bytes. by dividing by 256, and then for each byte divide by 16. So now here is another template for doing that. So start at the top. With each division, the quotient goes into the box on the left and below the divisor, and the remainder goes on the box to the right. For example, here is a conversation of 51,966. So we first divide this by 256, and I think our quotient goes to the box in the left, 202, and the remainder goes here, and then we divide both by 16, and then we get that. And now the hexadecimal digits are 12, 10, 15, 14, or CAFE, which looks more like a word than a number. And there you go. Now you may want to order your coffee. So 56495. And if some of you have used some of the original systems and played some like really old games, there used to be a lot of cheat codes in the games that were basically hexadecimal words. So and even error codes, like if you used Windows 98 or Windows 95. So there was a very popular error code called dead beef. Yeah, so this was very infamous. So it used to be represented like this. So 0x DEADBEEF and cafe, coffee. So you can see like people were really creative, where if you have to make a word with these just these six alphabets, there is like a lot of combination of cool words that you can do. So you can even look at some of the popular hexadecimal codes. In yeah, here. So yeah, I think it was like even obscene there, but a lot of people were using like a lot of really cool words. So there is, I think, a Wikipedia article that you can see, and it also has its significance where they were used, and they're all hexadecimal codes like disease, something else like dead to bad, dead babe, dead beef, and so on. So, as for every other number base, there is an addition table associated with hexadecimal. So, this is basically very similar to a truth table where there is a division. So, you know, like f divided by 0 is this, f divided by 1 becomes this, and then so on. So you can use the table and normal carry rules to add hexadecimal numbers. So it's exactly the same thing where this is actually not divided, it's plus. So where 2 plus 2 becomes 4, and 8 plus e, you convert that to e to the number 15 and 8, and then add that and then carry the number forward and then keep doing that. And then this gives you this new hexadecimal number. You will recall from chapter 13 that you can use 2's complements to represent a negative number. And now if you're dealing with 8-bit signed value in a binary, the negative number begins with 1, right? So in hexadecimal, 2-digit signed numbers are negative if they begin with 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, because that is the exact half. So in binary, we have either 0 or 1. So if I have to divide between positive and negative, my first bit just changes to 0 and 1. But in the case of hexadecimal, we have an option of 15 or 16 bits. So now you basically divide it in half, where you say that if it is 0 to 7, it is positive, like a signed bit, and then 8 to F is the negative. And also because the binary representation of all these hexadecimal digits also begin with 1. So for example, 99H could represent either the decimal number 153, 153 if you know that you are dealing with 1 byte unsigned number. And if I tell you that it is a signed number, it becomes decimal minus 103. Or the byte 99H could actually be the number 99 in decimal. This has a certain appeal to it, of course, but it seems to violate everything we have learned so far. I will explain how it works in chapter 23, but next I must talk about memory. So this was chapter 15. Pretty interesting. It gives us like a very simple glimpse into what is hexadecimals and why we use them. Any questions so far? Okay, let's move on. Has anyone here used IRC, Internet Relay Chat? I'm just asking like really old questions. No? Okay. So you should look at it. I think there are some, not IRCTC. I think Freenode is still hosting IRC. So IRC, if you look at Slack, Slack is basically a ripped off idea on built on top of IRC. So IRC was built back in like 80s, and this free node I think was created in 90s. So what you can do it is read about it. So it's all open source. It basically allows you to connect to a network. So think of this as your Slack channel or Reddit. Allows you to set your nickname, and then there are a bunch of channels that start with this hash or a pound sign, exactly like how Slack and Discord and everyone else has now copied over. But it all works in your terminal. Now I think there are web clients as well, but there are some really cool channels like Python, open source, security, Bitcoin, Linux is very popular. And a lot of OG developers hang out here, like people who have actually built Linux kernel. So there is a Raspberry Pi IRC channel, and the original developers of Raspberry Pi still hang around there, and you can go and chat with them. But one of the cool thing, if you go to any of these channels, you will see like they still a lot of them use hexadecimal names, the names that I was showing you as their own nicknames. So try it out. I think it's pretty interesting. Okay, so let's move on. We have 27 minutes. So chapter 16, and now it's the an assemblage of memory. I think now it will get a little interesting. So as we rouse ourselves from sleep every morning, memory fills in the blanks. We remember where we are, what we did the day before, and what we plan to do. These memories might come in a rush or a dribble, and maybe after some minutes of a few lapses might persist. Funny, I don't remember wearing my socks to bed, for example. But all in all, we can usually reassemble our lives and achieve enough continuity to commence living another day. So we know what tasks we have to do, what are the things we did yesterday, day before, what are the things that are pending, what you want to do today. Of course, human memory is very orderly. Try to remember something about high school geometry, and you're likely to start thinking about the kid who sat in front of you, or the day there was a fire drill just as teacher was about to explain what QED means. Nor is human memory foolproof. Indeed, writing was probably invented specifically to compensate for the failings of human memory. Perhaps the last night you suddenly woke up at 3 a.m. with a great idea for a screenplay. You grabbed the pen and paper you keep by your bed specifically for that purpose, and you wrote it down so you wouldn't forget. The next morning, you can read the brilliant idea and start work on the screenplay. Boy meets girl with car chase and explosion. That's it, or maybe not. We write and we later read. We save and we later retrieve, and that's a very common pattern throughout the history. I don't know if you guys know, but do you guys know what was the first civilization that actually started documenting everything they did, especially in science field? Anyone?
Babylonians.
Yes and no in a way. I think they were not much into science, but yeah, they did build like a good civilization. But I think Romans were one of the first OG documenters. So they had this library called Celsus, which was one of the biggest repository of human knowledge that time back in Earth, and it was burned down. And it is said that just by that being burned down, it costed humanity like 500 to 800 years of setback because a lot of knowledge was lost. So yeah, okay. Coming back, so the function of memory is to keep the information intact between those two events. Anytime we store information, we are making use of different types of memory. Paper is a good medium for storing textual information, and magnetic tape works well for music and movies. And fun fact, I think wherever I go, I have this journal, like bullet journal that I have been keeping from like 7, 8 years now. So every year I buy this book and I just take it everywhere. It's just much simpler, especially when you grow ranks in a company and you have like bunch of people coming to you throughout the day asking for a bunch of different things. It's just good to write down a point, and then later when you have some focus time, you go through each one of them. Anyways, telegraph relays too, when assembled into logic gates and then flip-flops, can store information. As we have seen, a flip-flop is capable of storing 1 bit. This isn't a whole lot of information, but it's a start. For once we know how to store one bit, we can easily store two, three, or more. We can always just like again zoom out, put bunch of more things, and then it just starts to work. So I think build it first, make it better later, something like that. So in chapter 14, we encountered the level triggered D type flip flop, which is made out of an inverter, two AND gates, and two NOR gates. And again, for the refreshers, like if you give a data node and if you add a clock, so when clock goes from 0 to 1, it stores the bit in Q, and the Q bar will always have the anti bit, like the opposite of that. And they both can never be 1. This is what we were trying to abuse here with the inverter. So if you give data as 1, they pass the another value as 0. So you cannot pass 1 and 1 in both the gates. That's why we put an inverter here. So when the clock input is 1, the Q output is same as the data input. But when the clock input goes to 0, the Q output holds the last value of data input. Further changes to data input will not affect the output until the clock goes back to 1 again. The logic table of flip flop is as follows. So if data is 0, clock is 1, nothing will happen. If data is 1, clock is 1, the Q will become 1 and Q bar will be 0. And then when the clock goes back to 0 and data is whatever, it doesn't matter. It will always have the last value of Q and Q bar. In chapter 14, this flip flop was featured in a couple of different circuits, but in this chapter, it will be used in only one way to store one bit of information. And for that reason, I'm going to rename the inputs and outputs so that they will be more in accordance with that purpose. So it's fairly simple. There is data in, data out, and instead of a clock, we are just calling it write. And if you remember that the whole machine where we had a lot of bulbs, there also we were calling it a write switch. So this is the same flip flop, but now Q output is called data out, and the clock input. And we are not taking this as an output. We don't need it. The whole value of Q bar is that it goes back and feed into this NOR gate here to give us the Q. We only care about data out. So clock input, which initially started, if you remember, it was called hold that bit. Then it became clock, and now we are just calling it like simple write flag. Is named write. Just as we might write down some information on the paper, the write signal causes the data in the signal to be written into or stored into the circuit. Normally, the write input is 0 and the data in signal has no effect on the output. But whenever we want to store the data in signal in the flip flop, we make the write input to 1 and then 0 again. As mentioned in chapter 14, this type of circuit is also called a latch because it latches onto the data. Here is how we might want to represent one bit latch without drawing all of individual components. So now again, we zoom out, we again create a box, and now this is how a latch looks. There is a data input, there is a write, and there is a data out. It is fairly easy to assemble multiple one bit latch into a multi-bit latch. All we have to do it is connect the write signal. So the write signal becomes something that goes into parallel into everyone, and then you have a bunch of individual data inputs here, and then this gives you data outputs. So now what you do is in this 8-bit latch, it has 8 inputs and 8 outputs. In addition, latch has a single input called write that is normally 0. So if you want to save something, you key in a 8-bit value and then you make the write input 1 and you make it a 0 again, and then it will save that value. This latch can also be drawn as a single box, likely so. So this basically in a way becomes your 8-bit hard drive or whatever, like flash drive or something, which can store like a 8-bit number now. Or to be consistent with 1-bit latch, it can be drawn this way. So we again can collapse this into a box. We can say 8 bits of data come in, 8 bits of data go out, and then there is a write flag or a write switch there. Another way of assembling 8 1-bit latches isn't quite as straightforward as this. Suppose we only want one data in signal and one data out signal, but we want the ability to save the value of the data in signal at 8 different times during the day, or maybe 8 different times during the next minute. And we also want the ability to later check those 8 values by looking at just one data out signal. In other words, rather than saving one 8-bit value in a 8-bit latch, we want to save 8 separate 1-bit values. So then what would you do? In that case, instead of doing this in like parallel, we will basically isolate the write switches, right? That's the natural way of thinking. So we know that we need 8 1-bit latches. Let's not worry right now about how data actually gets stored in these latches. Let's focus first on checking the data out signal of these 8 latches using only one light bulb. Of course, we could always test the output of each latch by manually moving the light bulb from latch to latch because it is storing the value, right? So if I move a bulb, it will light up or it will not light up. Yeah, but we would prefer something that is a bit more automated than that. In fact, we would like to use switches to select which of the 8 1-bit latches we want to look at. So how many switches do we need in that case? If we want to select something from 8 items, we need 3 switches, which is 2 raised to the power 3 becomes 8. You think of this as a binary number, so you can have these 8 cases: 000 001, da 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 da, 111. And so here are our 8 1-bit latches, 3 switches, a light bulb, and something else that we need in between the switches and light bulb. So now we wire them individually, all of them, and then there is voltage here, and then there is some unique box, and then this goes to one light bulb that is here. So this something else is that mysterious box with 8 inputs on top and 3 inputs on left. So with these 3 inputs on left, this is basically giving us the which of the bits is now one. By closing and opening 3 switches, we can select which of the 8 inputs is routed to the output at the bottom of the box. This output lights up the box. So, what is this box? We have encountered something like it before, although not with so many inputs. It is similar to a circuit we used in chapter 14 in the first revised adding machine. At that time, we needed something that lets us select whether a row of switches or the output from a latch was used as an input to an adder. Remember, there was a full adder where the response was going back and becoming an input, and we had a switch where we could just flip. But that was basically a choice. Like if I said it's like a if thing or a switch between the two cases. So this is something similar, but at that time we needed something that would just let us select between two. So we called it a 2 to 1 line selector. So here we need like a 8 line to 1 line selector, or I think it's also called a demux, demultiplier in this case. So now here you have your 8 bits of input, and then you basically select inputs that what do you want to see, which bit you want to see the value. Based on the value of this from 000 to 111, we get that output to you. So the 8 to 1 selector has 8 data inputs, 3 select inputs. The select inputs choose which of the data inputs appear at the output. For example, if select inputs are 000, the output is same as the 0th bit. If the select output is 111, it is same as the 8th bit. And if the select inputs are 101, then output is same as like 5th or D5. Here is the logic table, which is basically nothing but looking at this as a binary number and then giving you the Q block. The 8 to 1 selector is built from 3 inverters, 8 4 input AND gates, and 8 input OR gates, or like this. This is basically how you will create a switch case, or if else, if else, if else, or a switch case in electrical circuit, where based on these 3 numbers, we are changing the output from what we want to give forward. Now, this is a fairly hairy circuit, but perhaps just one example will convince you that it works. Suppose S2 is 1, S1 is 0, and S0 is 1. The inputs to sixth AND gate from the top include S0, S bar 1, and S2. So 6 include, so if you see here, this is a fairly complex one, but I can think of it as that this is going before the bar and this is going before the bar, but this is going after the bar. So I think we can see it here like this. It will possibly have an output of 0 if D3 is 0, or will have an output of 1 if D5 is 1. I'm not going to go through this gate, but I heavily encourage you guys to take a screenshot, go into Excalibur and try to do it, but it should work definitely. The same goes for an OR gate on the far right. Thus, if selector inputs are 101, the output is same as D5. So I think there is this last at the end, it's the OR gate. So let's recap what we are trying to do here. We are trying to wire 8 1-bit latches so that they can be individually written to using a single data in signal and individually examined using a single data out signal. We have established that now we can choose a data output signal from one of the 8 latches by using this 8 is to 1 selector as shown on the following page. So this is back to the same circuit. We have 8 1-bit latches, not one 8-bit latches. And then based on this selector here, we can choose to see the value stored between all of the 8 bits. So we are halfway finished. Now we have established what we need for the output side. Let's look at the input side. The input side involves the data input signal and the write signal. On the input side of latches, we can connect all the data input signals together, but we cannot connect the 8 write signals together because we want to be able to write into each latch individually. So in the case of 8 to 1 bit, our write signal was common because when we hit write, we want all 8 bits to be stored in the latch. But in this case, they have all independent because I want to store each bit independently. We have to write We have a single write signal that must be routed to one and only one of these latches. So if you think of this now, you even can create like a multiplexer for sorry, demultiplexer for your write signal, so that you don't have to again like go and wire everything individually, and make it easy for you to just give 3 signals and pick up a which where you want to write. So then this looks something like this, where now you can give 3 signals here for an input, and then you can pick which bit to write individually. So you can see, I think we built one abstraction and then we try to see where we can use the abstraction. And this is like very similar to like a creating like a function that you can reuse. It's like a reusable component here. To accomplish this task, we need another circuit that looks somewhat similar to 8 to 1 selector, but actually does the opposite. This is the 3 to 8 decoder. We have also seen simple data decoders before when wiring the switches to select the color of our ideal cat in chapter 11. Remember, like white, not tan, female, and like there was this whole formula. The 3 to 8 decoder has 8 outputs. At any time, all but one of the outputs are 0. The exception is the output that's selected by S0, S1, and S2 inputs. And this input is same as data inputs. So here we have a data in going on, and this is exactly similar to the circuit that we had here. And the difference here is that we are not converting it back to just one output here, and we are keeping this output as 7 bits, which is basically to signal like where should we send the write and where we should not send the write. So again, notice that the input to the 6th AND gate from the top includes S0, S bar 1, and S2. And no other AND gate has these 3 inputs. So this is basically all of them have different inputs, the combination of these inputs that is going there. The 6th AND gate from top will possibly have an output 0 if data input is 0, or output 1 if data input is, data input is 1. So here is the complete logic table. So I think we have one data input that is common across all of them, but then we have these S0, S1, and S2 switches, which is ensuring what needs to go forward and what doesn't go forward. And here is the truth table for that. So you can see that when we pass 000 in all 3 inputs, the data is only outputted at 1 bit. And then if I make it 001, it goes from 0th bit to 1 bit to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 here. So now here is the complete circuit. If we simplify this, where on the top we have a 3 to 8 decoder that allows us to pick which bit to write. And then we have a 8 to 1 selector, which allows us to see which bit value to check. Any questions here? This is a little complicated. I hope I did not rush through it. You're all good? Okay. So now notice that the three select signals to the decoder and selector are same. And I have also labeled those 3 signals the address. So the one that is coming here. So basically, whatever we are writing to is the same that we can also see as the output to. So they have wired these 2 things, the right signal that was there, but the right selector or something like that address in a similar way. So if I'm writing to the 0th bit, I can see what is the value of 0 bit in the data out. And then if I'm writing to the first like bit, second, third, or fourth, I can see the data out. So I have also labeled those three signals as address, like a post office box number. This 3-bit address determines which of the 8 1-bit latches is being referenced. On the input side, the address input determines that which latch the right signal will trigger to store the data input. And on the output side, at the bottom of figure, the address input controls 8 is to 1 selector to select the output of one of the 8 latches. This configuration of latches is sometimes known as read write memory. And this is basically what your very first RAM used to look like, a volatile memory store, but more commonly as random access memory or RAM, pronounced same as the animal. There is a ram animal which looks like a bison. I think it's here in US. This particular RAM configuration stores 8 separate bit values, and it can be represented in this way. So you can see now, if you can get like a breadboard large enough and get all these components and gates, you can build like a functioning RAM. And a very cool thing a lot of people have done is, because it's, you can create, most of the hardware can be simulated and created inside software. So I think if you go to YouTube and see, a lot of people have created working models of RAM in like games like Minecraft, where they have used some very basic logic selectors with TNT and some of the other elements, and it becomes like a functioning like 8-bit or 16-bit RAM there. So now this particular RAM configuration can be represented this way, where we built a box and say 8 into 1 RAM, and we have now three signals for an address. We have a data in, we have a write, and we have a data out. And now you can randomly access any of the bits, and it stores the memory as long as there is power in this circuit. It will store it and it will keep it. It's called memory because it retains information. It's called read and write memory because you can store new value in each latch, that is, write the value. And because you can determine what's stored in each latch, that is, you can later read the value, it's called random access memory. It's called random access memory because each of the 8 latches can be read from or written simply by changing the address inputs. In contrast, some of the other types of memory have to be read sequentially, right? That is, you will have to read the value stored at address 100 before you could read the value stored at address 101. A particular configuration of RAM is also often referred as RAM array. This particular RAM array is organized in a manner called abbreviated form 8 cross 1, pronounced 8 by 1. Each of the 8 values in this array is 1 bit. Multiply the two values to get the total number of bits that can be stored into the RAM array. So 8 into 1 means 8 bits. 8 bits, yeah, or 1 byte. The RAM arrays can be combined in various ways. For example, you can take two, now again, I think zoom out, take this thing, package it into a nice box IC or whatever component, and now let's take another one. So you can take two of these 8 by 1 RAM arrays and arrange them so that they are addressed in a same way. So now again, there is an address, just like we were putting this, we put in the box and then we make the address common, we make the data input common and data out common. And this becomes, so the right output of these two are connected. So the result is now 8 into 2 RAM array, where I think now you can have two different inputs for data pins and two different outputs for data, a common write and a common address. So now this RAM array stores 8 values, but each of them is not 2 bits in a size. So at any given time, when you write on, let's say, the first bit, it writes into two different bits and it gives you output of two different bits. Or two of the 8 into 1 RAM can also be combined in much more the same way that individual latches were combined, and by using 2 is to 1 selector and 1 is to 1 decoder. And again, I think there is an abstraction where we are saying, oh, this looks like we are just doing a bunch of common things. Why don't we take another decoder and put it here? And why don't we take another selector and put it here? And then this becomes something like this, where the data in becomes 1 to 2 decoder, where if it is 0, it goes and writes to the D0, DO, it goes to this RAM. If it is 1, it goes here and it writes here. And then similarly, we have a 2 into 1 selector, where this select becomes common. So if I am selecting 0th element, it goes to the first RAM array. And then because this select is coming here and it's common, it outputs to the RAM array that was stored in this one. And if it is DO1, it basically takes a second RAM array and it outputs that. The select input that goes to both of the decoder and the selector essentially selects between two of the 8 into 1 RAM array. So it's really a fourth address line. So it's actually becomes 16 is to 1 RAM array, because now what we have done is we have combined both of them to get like a single output now. So you still have the same address selectors and plus one more selector for this. There is a data input and there is a write. And now this RAM array can store 16 values each of 1 bit. So based on how we connect, we can either have a RAM array that can give me 2 bits as an output for 8 values, or it can become 16 values where each values can be of 1 bit. The number of values that a RAM array stores is directly related to the address inputs. With no address inputs, which is the case with 1 bit latch and the 8 bit latch, only one value can be stored. With one address input, two values are possible because this can either be 0 or 1. When two address inputs and four values are stored, so with three address inputs, it's become 2 raised to the power 3, so 8 values, and with four, it becomes 16. So the relationship is summed up by this equation. The number of values in RAM array is 2 raised to the power number of address inputs. I have demonstrated how small RAM arrays can be constructed, and it should not be difficult to imagine the much larger ones. For example, we can have a 1024 by 8 RAM, where I think we have a 10 bits of address, we have 8 bits of data input, right? And we have 8 bits of data output, which means now I can store, because I have 10, so 2 raised to the power 10 is 1024. So I can store the value of 8 1024 times, or I can store 1024 values in 8 bits. So you can see by increasing the number of address, you can increase the number of allocations while keeping the bit size of your data input same. So this RAM array stores a total of 8196 bits. So if you multiply them, you get like this is 8196 bits organized in 1024 values of 8 bits each. There are 10 address inputs because 20 raised to the power 10 becomes 1024, and there are 8 data inputs and 8 data outputs. In other words, this RAM array stores 1024 bytes. It's like a post office with 1024 post office box. Each one has different 1 byte value inside it, which may or may not be better than junk mail. 1024 kilobytes is known as 1024 bytes is known as a kilobyte. And here lies in much confusion. The prefix kilo from Greek word kiloi means 1,000 is more often used in the metric system. For example, a kilogram is 1,000 gram, a kilometer is 1,000 meter, but here I'm saying a kilobyte is a 1024 bytes and not 1,000 bytes. The problem is that the metric system is based on power of 10 and binary numbers are based on power of 2, and never the twain shall meet. The power of tens are very simple: 10, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000, and so on. Power of 2 are 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on. There is no integral power of 10 that equals to some integral power of 2. So there is no overlap ever if you keep drawing them. But every once in a while, they do come close. So 1,000 is fairly close to 1024, or to put it more mathematically using an approximately equal to sign with like two tildes, we can say like 2 raised to the power 10 is close enough to 10 raised to the power 3. And that is the basis of all the storage medium that we use. And this is why I think sometimes when you buy like a 64 GB pen drive, it only has 59 GB of actual data, because these marketing terms, they basically multiply by 1,000, but your computer, when it divides it by 1024. So you get a little less storage. Just 1 second. I had another meeting. So let me ping them that I'll be joining in 5 minutes. Or in fact, actually, we can wrap it in 5 minutes, I think. 1 second. Reading class. Okay. So nothing is magical about this relationship. All it implies is that a particular power of 2 is approximately equal to a particular power of 10. This little quirk allows people to conveniently refer to a kilobyte of memory when they actually mean 1024 bytes. So kilobyte is an abbreviated as K or KB. The RAM shown here can be stored to store 1024 bytes or 1 kilobytes or 1 KB. And it's very fascinating. This is still like very early 60s, where I think we are doing all of this. There is still no concept of a digital RAM or IC creating integrated circuits. What you don't say is that 1 KB RAM stores 1000 bytes, or in English, 1000 bytes. It's more than 1000, it's 1024. It sounds like you know what you're talking about. You either say 1K or 1 kilobyte. 1 kilobyte of memory has 8 data inputs and 8 data outputs and 10 address inputs. Because the bytes are accessible by 10 address inputs, the RAM array stores 2 raised to the power 10 bytes. Wherever we can add another address inputs, we double the whenever we add a address input, we double the amount of memory. So each line of the following sequence represents a doubling of memory. So in this case, if you see, 1 kilobyte is 1024 bytes or 2 raised to the power 10 bytes. And now if I increase my address value by 1, it doubles the amount of storage that I can store, because it basically adds a power of 2, uh, in 2 raised to the power 11, like to that. And if I add it again, it becomes 4 kilobyte, 16, 6, 8, 16, 32, 64, and you can see the pattern. And this is why like the RAM we buy today is 4 GB, 8 GB, 16 GB. Like when you buy like the whole thing, it is still following the exact same principle. Like you cannot go and buy 3 gigs of RAM. Like you will have to combine 2 and 1 together, which is also not recommended. So note that the number of kilobytes shown on the left are also the power of 2. With the same logic that lets us call 1024 bytes a kilobyte, we can now refer to 1024 kbs as a megabyte. The Greek word megas means great. Mega is abbreviated as MB, and the memory doubling keeps continuing. And then 1 megabyte is 2 raised to the power 20, and then 2, and then we can go to all the way to 1024 megabytes, which is 2 raised to the power 30 bytes. It's fairly trivial now to like to understand how this whole thing works. And then when we reach 1024 megabytes, it becomes a gigabyte, which is referred as GB. And then similarly, there is a terabyte, which is a TB, or teras means monster, which is equal to 2 raised to the power 40. And do you know what comes after terabyte? Anyone?
A petabyte, right?
Yep, a petabyte. Oh, it's written here also. And what's after petabyte? Anyone?
Exabyte.
I think so, yeah. The exabyte, and then it's zettabyte, I think. So
Yes.
yeah, it's very funny. The first ever smartphone I bought, like I scored like really good marks in 10th. I think I was second in my class. So my father, I don't know how I convinced him. He bought me a Nokia N73. It was a amazing phone. It has a 3.2 megapixel autofocus camera, and I remember that came with 16 MB micro SD card, so it could store maybe 5 songs in a really shitty quality. But it's so funny that now you can buy 1 terabyte SD card and then put it in like your camera or your devices, and it's only going to get even more crazy from here. So anyways, so yeah, so I think this goes keeps going terabyte, and then terabyte becomes this a gigabyte is almost a billion bytes, and then a terabyte is almost a trillion byte. Ascending that into the regions we have traveled, a petabyte becomes 2 raised to the power 50, which is approximately 10 raised to the power 15 or quadrillion. And then there is an exabyte, which is 18 raised to the power 10 or a quintillion. Just to provide you with a little grounding here, home computers purchased at this time of the book written 1999 commonly have 32 MB or 64 MB or 128 MB of random access memory. Uh, and don't get too confused yet. I haven't mentioned anything about hard drives. I'm only talking about RAM. So my first computer, why we got in 1995 or 1996, it had Windows 95, and I remember it had 8 MB of RAM. And then I think when I wanted to play games, I remember playing. I remember upgrading it to 32 MB of RAM so that I can play GTA 2. And then when GTA 3 dropped, it did not work because it was less, and then I had to upgrade it to 64 MB of RAM, and then it used to work in that. It was pretty crazy times. So people, of course, speak in shorthand. Someone who has 65,536 bytes of memory will say that I have 64K. and I'm a visitor from year 1980. Somebody who has these many bytes will say I have 32 megs, and that rare person who has this bit of memory will say I have got a gig, and I'm not talking about a music. Sometimes people will refer to kilobytes or megabytes, notice bits rather than bytes, which is rare. So most of our internet connections, I think they talk in terms of megabits. So if you have a 100 Mbps, it is 100 megabits per second. And then you divide it by 8, and then that is the speed that you get, which is rare. But almost always when people talk about memory, they are always talking in the number of bytes, not bits. Of course, to convert bytes to bits, multiply by 8. And usually, when kilobytes or megabits come up in a conversation, it will be in connection with data being transmitted over the wire and will occur in such a phrase as kilobits per second or megabits per second. For example, a 56K modem refers to 56 kbps, kilobits per second, not kilobytes. Now that we know how to construct RAM in any array size we want, let's not get too out of control. For now, let's simply assume that what we have assembled is 65,000 bits of memory or 64K kilobytes, which means now we have 16 address lines, 8 data input, a write, and 8 data output. Why 64 KB? Why not 32 KB or 128 KB? Because 65536 is a nice round number. It is 2 raised to the power 16, and this RAM array has 16-bit address. In other words, the address is 2 bytes exactly. And in this hexadecimal, and this is where I think the significance of hexadecimal comes, the address ranges from 4 bits of 0H, which is hexadecimal, through FFFFH. As I implied earlier, 64 KB was a common amount of memory in personal computer purchased around 1980. Although it wasn't constructed from telegraph relays, but could you really build such a thing using relays? Right? Because we know by 1980s we had like ICs, and like the whole electrical thing was left behind with electronics. I trust you won't consider it. Our design requires 9 relays for each bits of memory. So total 64K into 8 RAM array would require almost 5 million of them. It will be advantageous for us to have a control panel that lets us manage all this memory, to write values into memory or examine them. Such a control panel will have 16 switches to indicate an address, 8 switches to define an 8-bit value we want to write into a memory, another switch for a write signal itself, and 8 light bulbs to display a particular 8-bit value, as shown on the following page. So this would be something like a 64 KB RAM control panel. And this is why some of the initial RAM systems that you see, they're size of like these huge rooms. And then there will be like one random control panel with knobs where you could use that. But imagine maintaining them. Like if something goes wrong, like a relay, you first need to troubleshoot and find like there would actually be a memory leak for real. Like like something can break. All the switches are shown in their off zero position. I have also included a switch labeled takeover. The purpose of this switch is to let other circuits use the same memory as the control panel is connected to. When the switch is set to 0, as shown, the rest of the switches on the control panel don't do anything. When the switch is set to 1, however, the control panel has exclusive control over the memory. This is a job for a bunch of 2 is to 1 selectors. In fact, we need 25 of them. For 16 for address signal, 8 for data input, and another one for write. So here is how the circuit looks like, and then there is a takeover switch here, and then we make 25 2 is to 1 selectors. When the takeover switch is open as shown, the address, data input, and the write input inputs to 64K into 8 RAM arrays come from external signals shown at the top left of 2 is to 1 selector. When the takeover switch is closed, the address, data input, and write signals to the RAM array comes from the switches on the control panel. In either case, data out signal from the RAM array goes into the 8 light bulbs and possibly someplace safe else. I will draw a 64K by 8 RAM array with such a control panel this way. So now you have this control panel that controls like this RAM and like basically this side of the equation, and then data out is something that you get and you can do something with it. When the takeover switch is closed, you can use a 16 address switch to select any of these 65,536 or 2 raised to the power 16 addresses. The light bulbs show you the 8-bit value currently stored in the memory at that address. You can use the 8 data switches to define a new value, and then you can write the value into the memory using the write switch, which is here, this knob. The 64 by 8 RAM array and control panel can certainly help you keep track of any of 2 raised to the power 16 8-bit values you may need to have handy. But we have also left open the opportunity for something else. Some other circuitry, perhaps to use the values we have stored in memory and to write to the other ones in as well. There is one more thing you have to remember about memory. It is very important. When I introduced the concept of logic gates in chapter 11, I stopped drawing the individual relays that compose these gates. In particular, I no longer indicate that every relay is connected to some kind of supply of electricity. Whenever a relay is triggered, the electricity is flowing through the coils of the electromagnets and holding the metal contact in place, if you remember where we came from. So now if you have 64K into 8 RAM array filled to the brim with 65,536 of your favorite bytes and you turn off the power to it, what happens? All the electromagnets lose their magnetism with a loud thunk. All the relays and the contacts returns to their untriggered state, like zero. And the contents of all the RAM, they go poof, gone forever. This is why random access memory is also called a volatile memory. It requires a constant supply of electricity to retain this contents. And with this, folks, we are at the end of chapter 16. So I will stop sharing and see if anyone has any questions. But this was a really interesting chapter, right? Like we are now everything that we talked about in last 10 chapters are now coming back, coming together. I see a bunch of questions. Sachin has a question. Have you ever seen someone remove RAM from a running computer? Oh, I have done that. Yeah, it just fucks it up. I did it a couple of times in school. It sometimes can even fry the motherboard if you're not too careful with it. Most of the times it's okay, and sometimes it's even funny. Like if you have very high RAM, like 64 gig, and you pull 132 gig, sometimes it just keeps running because your some of your OS that needs the files that can be running on the first stick, and it is able to reload it again there. Ashwath is saying so each latch is a bit in a memory and with two NOR gates to maintain one or zero Q or Q bar. Yes, I think in very simple words, yes. And then you can connect these latches together to either create one 8-bit number or 8 1-bit numbers. It was unused IC. Yeah. Yeah, I will never do it on my system, Sachin. Like, yeah, RAM is too expensive, anyways. Nowadays, I won't be able to afford it again. Like, if that happens. My 64 gig kit I bought from $90 from Micro Center is now over $450. It's almost like 4.5x more. So yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I like the Nan game. I didn't get a chance to play with it, but I'll probably check it out today. But cool, guys. Thank you. If there is no questions, I'll drop off. I have another meeting, but yeah, feel free to drop me a text on Discord. But yeah, we'll see you next week then. Bye bye.